Commander Alara Quinn had long ago learned to embrace the silence of space. The hum of the Odyssey's engines was the closest thing she had to comfort on this journey, the quiet lull that seemed to swallow the very concept of noise. But tonight, there was something else, an unease that settled heavily over the bridge, a coldness she couldn't shake. She adjusted the ship's trajectory on her console and glanced around at her crew. The 6 other faces aboard the Odyssey reflected her own fatigue and tension. Communications Officer Nolan sat closest to her, his eyes glued to a dim screen, his fingers twitching over the controls as though he were trying to coax a secret from the abyss. Navigator Raj leaned back, fidgeting with his headset, while Dr. Mora, the biologist, squinted at an array of samples in the ship's tiny lab, occasionally muttering to herself. "Still nothing?" Alara asked, her voice just above a whisper. Nolan turned, his face bathed in the blue light of his monitor. "There's something. I've been picking up fragments on the old wave frequencies. Human fragments." A silence settled over the crew, thick and heavy. They had been out in deep space for months, their mission a mixture of exploration and mystery, a long shot that humanity had taken decades ago. Proxima Centauri B, a planet that had long lingered on the edges of fascination, had yielded little to the probes and robotic scouts sent in past years. But now, Odyssey had picked up a signal, weak and fractured, but unmistakably human. It could just be an echo, Dr. Mora offered, her voice trembling with both doubt and hope. Signals can bounce and decay for decades in space. We could be listening to a piece of history. Nolan shook his head. I'm getting modern dialect, not old Earth dialects. And there's more than one voice, like it's a distress call, looping. It keeps repeating a message. Mostly static, but I got part of it a few hours ago. What does it say? Alara leaned forward, her fingers tapping on the armrest. Nolan paused, his gaze flitting between the screen and his crewmates. It says, "We're here. We're waiting. Welcome, family." Then it cuts out, like something's muffling it. A chill crawled up Alara's spine, an instinctive reaction to the words. "Welcome, family," she repeated, her voice thick with confusion. Raj let out a low whistle. "We're the first humans to get this close to Proxima Centauri B in over 70 years. There's no way anyone could be down there. Not unless they survived," Dr. Mora finished, her voice barely a whisper. The idea of a lost colony surviving for decades on this distant, hostile planet felt surreal, but also possible. Earth's desperation during the peak of the colony projects was well documented. Records of attempted settlements had surfaced, then vanished. Proxima Centauri B had been one of the farthest outposts. Their ship logs contained little information beyond a launch date and a classified status on the colony's mission. Alara took a deep breath, steadied herself, and addressed the crew. "We'll proceed as planned. Whatever that signal is, it came from somewhere. And if we can make contact, even better." Nolan nodded, though his expression was strained. "I'll keep monitoring. The signal has been intermittent, but maybe if we get closer, I can clear up some of the distortion." The Odyssey continued its silent trajectory, the crew shifting into the automated routines of final approach. But unease lingered, filling the gaps in conversation, stretching the quiet to breaking. Hours later, Alara watched as the planet Proxima Centauri B came into view on the monitor. It wasn't what she had imagined. The surface was scarred and barren, shrouded in thick clouds that roiled and shifted, casting strange shadows across the landscape. Thin streams of red and violet light glimmered along the clouds' edges, casting an almost sinister hue over the planet. "Landing zone prepped," Raj announced, his voice shaking slightly. "It's clear enough for descent, but I'm seeing strange energy fluctuations near the surface. Could be atmospheric interference or the source of the signal," Nolan finished, glancing at Ilara. Ilara nodded, feeling the familiar pang of uncertainty gnaw at her. She felt the tension from her crew. This was a mission none of them had expected to turn so ominous. As if on cue, Nolan's console blared with static, and his hands flew over the controls. I think the signal just came through clearer," he whispered, eyes wide. He adjusted the frequency, and the fragmented message played over the speakers. This time it was less distorted, with a voice that sounded eerily human, yet vacant, almost too calm for a distress call. "We're here. We're waiting. Welcome, family. We're becoming one." The last words sent a ripple of dread through the room. Each crew member exchanged uneasy glances, none of them voicing what they all felt. Something about the tone, something almost inviting, struck them as deeply wrong. Ilara cleared her throat, hoping her voice wouldn't betray her fear. "Everyone, prepare for descent. Whatever's down there, we're finding out what happened." The descent was rougher than expected. The Odyssey shook as it broke through the planet's turbulent atmosphere, the clouds swirling violently around them, battering the ship as if resisting their entry. Red and violet streaks of lightning illuminated the darkness, casting flashes of strange, angular shadows. "Atmosphere's breathable, but barely," Raj said as the ship leveled out, hovering just above the planet's surface. "It's thin, like there's something wrong with the air composition, elevated spore count, and," he frowned, "high levels of organic particulates. That's strange." "What do you mean?" Ilara asked, her mind racing. "Usually, spores are signs of active biological matter, like fungus or plant life, but these readings..." He shook his head. "It's almost as if the spores are suspended, alive but dormant or waiting." The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. Ilara forced herself to stay focused. They had prepared for all types of extraterrestrial ecosystems, even hostile ones. This wasn't the time to let fear get the better of them. Nolan's console crackled, drawing everyone's attention. "Signals back," he muttered, turning the audio up. The message played again, distorted yet unmistakably clear. "We are waiting. Welcome, family. Come to us." There was something about the voice, a hint of reverence mixed with an eerie detachment. It was no longer merely inviting, it was summoning. The Odyssey touched down in a clearing near what appeared to be the remnants of a settlement. Twisted metal frames jutted from the ground, covered in thick grayish moss that pulsed faintly, as though alive. A faint, bitter smell filled the air, clinging to their suits as they stepped out onto the planet's surface. Ilara led the way, her pulse racing as she scanned the area. The buildings, or what remained of them, had once been human-made but were now overtaken by alien growth. Organic tendrils snaked over the walls and floors, merging with the structures like invasive roots. What happened here?" Dr. Mora whispered, staring at a twisted support beam that appeared fused to the wall by a web of fibrous fungal material. Raj's voice broke the silence. "I'm not seeing any movement, no life signs, but I'm picking up strange biosignals from inside the colony center." They followed the signals, moving cautiously toward the largest structure, a dome barely standing amidst the creeping moss. The ground beneath them felt soft and pliant, as though covered in layers of organic matter. As they approached the dome, a faint sound drifted through the air, a whisper that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Alara's breath hitched as she recognized it, the voice from the transmission. "We're here. We're waiting. Welcome, family." It wasn't a recording, the message was live. Commander Alara Quinn stepped off the Odyssey and onto the soil of Proxima Centauri B, feeling the planet's chill seep through her boots. The sky above was dense with clouds, casting deep shadows that made the landscape feel suffocating, haunted. Behind her, the rest of the crew fanned out cautiously, each step stirring up puffs of dark, spore-filled dust. The cluster of buildings that comprised the colony loomed ahead, battered, twisted, and barely recognizable as human constructs. Metallic frames jutted from the ground at unnatural angles, tangled in thick vines of alien moss that clung to every surface, pulsing faintly in time with some unseen rhythm. "This can't be right," Dr. Mora whispered as she scanned the environment with her portable lab. She frowned at her readings. "The flora here is interconnected, like one massive organism." Navigator Raj stepped beside her, peering at her data pad. "You're saying it's alive?" he asked, his voice a mixture of awe and dread. "Not just alive, aware," Mora muttered. She pointed toward the distant buildings, her hand trembling. "It's like it's listening." Alara swallowed her discomfort and signaled for the team to move forward. "Let's stick together. No one goes anywhere alone," she said, her voice steady, trying to keep the team's morale intact. They moved toward the nearest building, a dome partially collapsed under what seemed like decades of growth. The door to the structure creaked as they pried it open, and a wave of stale air, thick with an odd metallic tang, rushed out to greet them. Inside, shadows clung to the walls, distorting their surroundings as though the darkness itself were alive. The crew's helmet lights cut through the gloom, revealing rows of dusty cots, each still draped with threadbare blankets. Personal belongings were strewn across the floor, photographs, broken tools, torn clothing. Alara picked up a picture of a family, smiling faces caught in a moment of happiness that now felt like a cruel illusion. The faces, though human, seemed strangely distant, their eyes haunted. Dr. Mora crouched by one of the cots, examining a small patch of organic material fused to the fabric. It was a pale, waxy growth that oozed a sickly fluid when touched. "This isn't just fungus. It's an extension of the life outside," she said, her face pale. "Some kind of symbiotic parasite. They must have inhaled these spores for years. It's no wonder they changed." "Changed how?" Nolan asked, glancing uneasily around the room. Dr. Mora looked up at him, a faint glimmer of horror in her eyes. "They became something else, something neither human nor fully alien." A deep scraping sound echoed from the back of the dome, and the crew spun around. Shadows shifted, and the light from their helmets revealed a figure, emaciated, gaunt, and shrouded in tattered clothing. The figure's skin was pale and almost translucent, with faint tendrils tracing across the flesh like veins, pulsing as though carrying some alien life force. Who are you?" Ilara asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. The figure stepped forward, hollow eyes flicking from face to face, studying them as if seeing them through a fog. When they spoke, their voice was a rasp, strained and broken, yet disturbingly calm. "We are here," they said slowly, as though forming each word took immense effort. You have come back." The crew stood in stunned silence. Ilara felt her heart pound as she tried to process the figure's words. "Back? What do you mean?" "We were abandoned. Left to become part of this place," the figure whispered. They reached out a trembling hand, the fingers thin and spindly, with strange, almost translucent webbing stretching between them. "We welcomed the becoming. We had no choice." Ilara motioned for the crew to back away, but the figure continued speaking, their voice growing stronger, stranger. "We were promised salvation, that this world would make us stronger, make us more than human. They gave us the spores. They told us it was part of the adaptation." "Adaptation?" Nolan's voice was barely a whisper, but the figure's sharp gaze turned to him, a faint glint of something predatory in their eyes. "They said the planet's life forms would fuse with ours, that we would learn to breathe its air, consume its resources. But," the figure's mouth twisted into something resembling a smile, yet devoid of any warmth or sanity, "it consumes us. The spores became part of us, made us one with the conduit." "Conduit?" Raj asked, a tremor in his voice. The figure pointed through the broken wall of the dome toward the center of the colony. "The conduit connects us all. It calls us, binds us." Their expression turned blank, the eerie calm resurfacing. "We cannot leave. We are the colony now." Ilara felt a deepening dread settle over her. The figure seemed to slip into a trance, mumbling disconnected phrases about oneness and harmony. The rest of the crew shifted uncomfortably, their eyes drawn to the thin, sinewy filaments that seemed to trace patterns across the figure's skin, pulsing in time with their breath. Without warning, the figure let out a strangled gasp, then collapsed to their knees, clutching at their chest as though something inside them had shifted, twisted. The veins under their skin darkened, spreading like ink, contorting their expression into one of agony. Ilara stepped back, instinctively reaching for her weapon. But before anyone could act, the figure let out a breath that sounded more like a sigh of relief than a scream. Their body went still, and slowly, a faint smile crept back onto their face, a look of peace, of surrender. Then they whispered almost tenderly, "The conduit welcomes you, family." The crew moved deeper into the colony, their steps hesitant, their breaths shallow. Each building told a new story of decay and horror, each structure overrun by the same pulsing moss and sinewy growths. The further they went, the more they felt as if they were being watched, not by any specific pair of eyes, but by the colony itself, as though every shadow, every pulse of the alien vines was a sentient force studying them, gauging their weakness. They found other survivors, all in various stages of becoming. Some barely registered the crew's presence, staring blankly at walls where alien flora had fused with human-made structures, creating surreal, unsettling murals. One colonist rocked back and forth, singing a fractured lullaby that echoed through the corridors in a disturbing monotone. Another lay sprawled against a wall, half-conscious, their skin covered in thin membranous filaments that seemed to breathe in unison with the faint hum from the conduit. At one point, Nolan leaned down, trying to speak with a woman whose face was half obscured by a network of pulsating tendrils. She opened her mouth as if to reply, but only a soft, guttural moan escaped her lips, and her eyes rolled back, unfocused. He recoiled, horror plain on his face. "It's like they're barely human anymore," he whispered. Dr. Mora knelt beside the woman, inspecting the tendrils closely. They're fused to her nerve endings. It's as though the spores took control of her nervous system, making her body a part of whatever the conduit is. "Mora," Ilara said sharply, "we need to keep moving." But Dr. Mora seemed transfixed, her face pale, her fingers tracing the lines of infection with horrified fascination. This was intentional. Someone wanted them to become this. Nolan grabbed Mora's arm, pulling her back to her feet. "Let's go. We can't stay here." The crew finally reached the center of the colony, where the tallest building stood, a decayed tower that loomed over them like a twisted sentinel. A wide gash in its side revealed a massive, pulsing organic mass inside, pulsating like a heartbeat, stretching up to the top of the building. Dr. Mora's voice was barely audible. This must be the conduit. A thick network of tendrils extended from the conduit, branching out into the ground and through the air, spreading to every corner of the colony like veins. Some tendrils even reached towards the sky, undulating slightly as if sensing the crew's presence. What is it?" Raj asked, staring at the massive structure with barely contained fear. Nolan swallowed, his face pale. "It's not just a structure, it's alive." Ilara's gaze locked onto the conduit, a disturbing sense of familiarity washing over her, as if she had seen it before in her nightmares. The spores, the filaments, the whispers. It all led here. "We are here. We are waiting," a voice echoed from within the conduit, layers of voices merging into a single distorted tone. "Welcome, family." The words sent a chill down her spine. Ilara clenched her jaw, forcing herself to stay grounded, but every instinct screamed that they were in the presence of something beyond comprehension, something that was as much a prison as it was a being. "Back to the ship," she commanded, unable to shake the feeling that whatever this was, it had noticed them. Now, as they turned to leave, the whispers grew louder, and a surge of movement rippled through the conduit's tendrils, reaching toward them, closing in as though beckoning them back into its fold. Their last glimpse before retreating was of the conduit's pulsing form, stretching and twisting, shifting with hunger, a thing that lived and breathed, feeding on everything it had touched. Continuation of the story, coming soon.